In today's video, we examine 3 haunting, unsolved mysteries that are connected to fast food restaurants. But before that, I have a documentary to recommend that's available on Magellan TV, who are the sponsors of this video. The documentary is called Murder in Paradise, and it's about the murder of 2 British backpackers in Thailand in September 2014. I researched a ton of true crime, and I found these 2 murders shocking. Murder in Paradise is a documentary that you won't easily forget. Magellan TV has a lot of great documentaries, and they are all ad-free. I also really enjoy their history documentaries about notorious people from the past. Magellan TV has documentaries that are in 4K, and they are both stunning and fascinating. Magellan TV is run by filmmakers, and new documentaries are continually being added, so there's always something to watch. Magellan TV can be watched anywhere at any time on your TV, laptop, or mobile device. It works with Roku, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, iOS, and Google Play. You can also cast from your phone to your TV. Magellan TV has a special offer for criminally listed viewers. Just go to try.magellantv.com/criminally listed and you'll get a month for free. So please help support Criminally Listed and find something great to watch by checking out Magellan TV. Number 3. Nick Kunselman and Stephanie Hart Grizzell. On April 20th, 1999, 18-year-old Eric Harris and 17-year-old Dylan Klebold walked into their school, Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, and they started shooting. In total, they murdered 13 people and 24 other people were injured. At the end of their shooting spree, Harris and Klebold took their own lives. At the time, it was the deadliest school shooting in American history. It remains one of the most infamous mass shootings of all time. 2 people who attended Columbine High School that day were freshmen Nick Kunselman and Stephanie Hart Grizzell. Nick and Stephanie met in middle school and they eventually started dating. The tragedy of the Columbine shooting made them even closer. Nick's mother said he acted like the shooting didn't affect him too greatly, but she felt like it did. Nick and Stephanie's family thought that the couple was good together. They both loved art and music. Nick and Stephanie thought that surviving the Columbine massacre would be the hardest thing that they would have to go through together. Nick worked at a Subway restaurant that was about a half a mile from Columbine High School. He had been hired in early 2000. Nick was a responsible young man and he impressed the manager. After a month of working there, Nick was tasked with closing the restaurant for the night. Often, Stephanie would come by and keep him company while he was closing. On the night of February 13, 2000, about 10 months after the shooting at Columbine, Nick was working the evening shift at Subway. Stephanie was at home that evening. Her mother said goodnight and told her that she loved her. Stephanie's mother then went to bed. After she went to bed, Stephanie snuck out of the house and drove to the Subway. At around 1 a.m., another employee of the Subway store drove by the shop and she noticed that the lights were still on. The restaurant should have been closed 3 hours earlier. The employee went into the store and behind the counter, she found the dead bodies of 15-year-old Nick Kunselman and his girlfriend, 16-year-old Stephanie Hart Grizzell. They both had been shot to death. The police have released very little information regarding the murders. What is known is that there was a surveillance camera inside the restaurant, but it did not record the murders. The police did not specify if any money was stolen. But the police did say that they did not think that the motive behind the murders was robbery. The same employee who found the bodies saw a young man exit out the back door. She described him as white with blonde hair. He was between the ages of 16 and 20, He stood about 5'6" to 5'8", and he weighed around 150 to 170 pounds. He was wearing a black ball cap, a black coat with red lining, blue jeans that were flared, and tennis shoes. In the wake of the double homicide, several people confessed, but the police were able to prove that they were false confessions. There were rumors that a drug ring was operating out of the restaurant. The police pursued this lead vigorously, but they did not find any evidence that the restaurant was connected to a drug ring. Over 20 years later, the motive behind the double homicide has never been determined. A suspect also hasn't been identified. The police have over 20 binders full of information regarding the investigation. They do have some DNA evidence, but it has not been helpful in identifying a suspect as of yet. They also have fingerprint evidence. The problem is that since the crime scene was a fast food restaurant, a lot of people were in and out of the restaurant throughout the day. So the police are not sure if any of the physical evidence they collected was left by the killer. The families of Nick Kunselman and Stephanie Hart Grizzell thought that the case would be solved in days. But over 20 years after the brutal double homicide, the case is cold. The families still hold out hope that they will get closure on the case and the killer will face justice. Number 2. Dewayne Bible. In the fall of 1985, Dewayne Bible, who lived in Indianapolis, Indiana, was 24 years old. Bible was the youngest of 8 children. He was also the father of a 5-year-old daughter. In high school, Bible started working at McDonald's. He was eventually promoted to assistant manager, and in the autumn of 1985, he was still working there. Bible liked his job, and he cared about his employees. On days when he wasn't working, he would call into the restaurant and check on the employees. On the morning of November 7th, 1985, Bible was working with 5 female employees. Just after 7 a.m., 2 men came in and sat at a table. They drank several cups of coffee and smoked some cigarettes. About an hour after they came into the restaurant, all the other customers had left. One of the men walked out of the restaurant and then re-entered through the back door. The other man jumped over the counter. Both men were armed with handguns. One of the men grabbed the money in the registers. The other man forced Dewayne Bible into the back office and forced him to open the safe. In total, the men got just over $1,000. After collecting the money, the 2 robbers ordered Bible and the 5 employees to get into the freezer. Bible asked if he could turn the freezer off so that they didn't freeze to death. The robbers did not respond to his request and forced the employees to get into the freezer. Once all 6 employees were in the freezer, the robbers realized they wanted a hostage. They told one of the female employees to step out of the freezer. Bible asked to be taken hostage instead, and the robbers agreed. About 5 minutes later, the 5 employees in the freezer heard 2 or 3 loud pops. Moments later, there was silence. About half an hour later, the employees were able to get the freezer door open by using a piece of cardboard to open a latch on the door. When they got out of the freezer, they found the dead body of 24-year-old Dewayne Bible. He had been shot twice behind the right ear with a .44 caliber handgun. The police believe that after Bible got out of the freezer, he turned off the freezer so the 5 employees wouldn't freeze. The robbers became angry with him, so they executed him. After the story of Dewayne Bible's heroism was made public, he was honored in the Indiana House of Representatives. He was also inducted into the Red Cross's Hall of Fame. Dewayne Bible's murder shocked the people of Indianapolis, and they wanted his killers brought to justice. The 5 employees described the robbers to the police. One was a black man with a light complexion and sandy hair. He was in his late 20s or early 30s. He was tall, about 6'3" and stocky. The second robber was also black, and his skin was darker than the first robber. The second man was about 5'10" and slender. They estimated that he was about 130 pounds. He had uncombed hair or a matted afro and a thin beard. His face also had pockmarks or acne scars. One of the employees remembered she served the robber with the darker skin coffee. The employees and a customer who saw the robbers said that both robbers were smoking cigarettes. 3 of the employees met with a police sketch artist. Together, they described the 2 men to the artist. The sketches were then posted around the McDonald's. Weeks after the robbery, the police received several tips that 35-year-old Lawrence Gregory Bay may have been involved in the robbery. Specifically, they thought he was the thin robber with the darker skin. The police had the employees come and look at a photo lineup of 6 men, which included Gregory Bay. All the photos were black and white, and all the men were black. None of the employees were able to identify any of the men. Despite this, the police were still sure that Gregory Bay was involved in the robbery. They thought that the problem was the quality of his photo. The police then got a color photo of Gregory Bay. 2 months after the robbery, they put the color photo in a stack of 27 photos and showed it to 4 of the 5 employees. All 4 employees thought that Gregory Bay might have been one of the robbers, but they weren't sure. Once again, the police thought that positive identification wasn't made because of the quality of Gregory Bay's photo. The police did another photo lineup with 4 of the 5 employees. They had a third photo of Gregory Bay, and it was the clearest photo they had so far. The photo lineup had pictures of 5 other men. This time, the 4 employees picked Gregory Bay out within seconds. Based on this third photo lineup, on March 2nd, 1986, Lawrence Gregory Bay was arrested for the murder of Dewayne Bible. After Gregory Bay was arrested, he was placed in a police lineup. 3 of the employees were brought in and given specific instructions. They were told that the suspect may or may not be in the lineup. They were told not to talk to each other. If they saw one of the robbers, they were to mark it on a piece of paper. One of the employees immediately picked out Gregory Bay and marked it on the piece of paper. The other 2 employees started whispering to each other. They were concerned that the men might see them, and this made them afraid. They also didn't agree as to what man they thought was the robber. So they did not end up marking anything on their piece of paper. Then the 2 other employees were brought in to view a lineup which included Gregory Bay. They also did not identify any of the men as one of the robbers. One of the women later said she was afraid that the men could see her, and if she identified him, she might be putting her life in danger. After the lineups, the 3 employees who didn't want to identify any of the men in the lineup because they were afraid got in contact with the police. They explained their situation, so the police had them watch a video of the lineup. This time, they all picked out Gregory Bay. Lawrence Gregory Bay went to trial in November 1986, a year after the deadly robbery. The police had no physical evidence that connected him to the robbery. The gun used in the murder has never been recovered. Also, Gregory Bay's fingerprints were not found at the crime scene. The only evidence against him were the accounts of the eyewitnesses of the employees. 4 of the 5 employees testified that Gregory Bay was one of the robbers. The prosecution said that Gregory Bay may not have done the actual shooting. In August 1987, the police did arrest a man that they thought was the shooter. However, none of the employees picked him out of a lineup. The police suspected that the witnesses didn't recognize him because he had lost 50 pounds since the robbery. The suspected shooter was set to go to trial a month after Gregory Bay's trial. Gregory Bay's trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 4.5 hours. He was found guilty of all charges. A month later, he was sentenced to the maximum 281 years of prison. After Gregory Bay was convicted, the charges against the other man were dropped because the district attorney did not think that they had a strong enough case. Lawrence Gregory Bay's lawyers immediately appealed the conviction. The appeal argued that the witnesses' identifications of Gregory Bay were tainted. By the time they positively identified him in a photo lineup, they had been shown his photo in 3 different lineups. They may have just picked him because at that point, he was a familiar face from the other photo lineups. As for the physical lineups, only one of the employees picked out Gregory Bay immediately. Of course, this was after she saw 3 photographs of him in 3 different photo lineups. The other 3 employees identified him only after they had a chance to discuss the lineup with each other. The appeal also pointed out that the initial sketch that led to the tips that Gregory Bay was involved in the robbery was a collaboration between 3 of the employees. While they were discussing the robbers' appearances, they may have influenced and altered each other's memories. The judge did not find the arguments in the appeal persuasive, and Gregory Bay's appeal was denied. In 2007, over 20 years after he was convicted, Lawrence Gregory Bay's lawyer asked for the DNA from the crime scene to be tested. This included a coffee cup, a coffee lid, a stir stick, 2 cigarette butts that were recovered from the table where the robbers were sitting. There was also a cigarette butt that was collected from near the safe. One of the employees remembered that she served the thin robber with the darker skin coffee. The witnesses later said that this man was Gregory Bay. The employees and customer said that both men were smoking cigarettes. It turned out that DNA could only be pulled from the coffee cup and the 2 cigarette butts that were found at the table. The DNA from one man was pulled from the cigarettes and the coffee cup. The DNA did not belong to Gregory Bay. The second cigarette butt had the DNA from at least 2 people on it. The DNA did not match the DNA that was left on the coffee cup and the first cigarette butt. Neither set of DNA that was found on the second cigarette butt matched Gregory Bay's DNA. Gregory Bay's lawyer argued that since Gregory Bay's DNA was not found at the crime scene, his conviction should be overturned and he should be given a new trial. The judge who was ruling on the appeal had to decide if the original jury were presented with the DNA evidence, could they have possibly reached a different verdict. The judge ultimately decided that the jury would not have reached a different verdict. The judge acknowledged that the DNA found on the coffee cup and one of the cigarette butts probably belonged to the second robber, known as the light-skinned man. But the judge did not think that the 2 different DNA profiles found on the second cigarette butt was a problem. The lab tech who tested the DNA said it was possible that the DNA found on the second cigarette butt could have belonged to someone who accidentally contaminated the evidence. This could have been the person who collected the cigarette butt at the crime scene or an employee at the crime lab. The judge also said that a critical thing that the lab tech said was that at least 2 DNA profiles were found on the cigarette butt. This did not exclude the possibility that more DNA, possibly Gregory Bay's DNA, was on the cigarette butt. For those reasons, the judge did not think that Gregory Bay should get a new trial. In October 2009, over a year after Lawrence Gregory Bay's appeal for a new trial was denied, he passed away in prison at the age of 58. Many people continue to believe that Gregory Bay was wrongly convicted. In the years since his appeal was denied, reliance on DNA evidence has skyrocketed, while science has proved eyewitness accounts are highly unreliable. Since Gregory Bay died a year after his appeal 12 years ago, there has been no interest in seeing if improved DNA technology could clear him or confirm if he was part of the deadly robbery. Also, the police and the district attorney did not think that, even if Gregory Bay was involved in the robbery, that he was the trigger man. So the question is, who shot Dewayne Bible? When Bible was murdered, he was hailed as a hero, and social commentators said that no expense should be spared in finding his killer. It's been over 35 years since Bible's murder, and it's believed that the police have DNA from the killer. Yet, the person who put 2 bullets into Bible's head in cold blood has never been identified, and he has possibly been walking around free for 3.5 decades. Finally, Dewayne Bible unquestionably died a hero. His memory should not be tainted with a possible wrongful conviction that resulted in a man spending nearly 20 years in prison. Number 1. Morris Davis. In the spring of 1985, Morris Davis was 23 years old, and he lived in Great Falls, Montana. Morris was a good old Montana boy. He loved being outdoors. He often went fishing and hunting. He also loved the rodeo. Morris was a large man. He was 6'3" and he weighed 240 pounds. He was a gentle giant who was always there to lend a helping hand. If any of his friends or family needed extra muscle, he was there to help. Morris also loved dancing the jitterbug. He had a few different dance partners, but he wasn't dating anyone. However, he did have 2 loves in his life, his golden Labrador retriever and his pickup truck. For work, Morris delivered pizza for a local pizza place called Howard's Pizza. Morris's younger brother, Cliff, worked as a paramedic. Cliff was on duty the night of April 5th, 1985. He and his partner were called to a home where there had been a shooting. When Cliff arrived, he was surprised to find that his brother Morris had been the victim of the shooting. Cliff helped load his brother into the ambulance. They drove to the hospital while officers performed CPR on Morris. Sadly, there was nothing that could be done for 23-year-old Morris Davis. He was pronounced dead on arrival. The police immediately knew that the motive behind the murder was robbery. Morris's delivery wallet, which contained no more than $300, had been stolen. His personal wallet and coin changer had been left behind. There were several people delivering pizzas that night for Howard's Pizza, and Morris was just the unlucky person who got called to that address. The house Morris had been called to was vacant and had been repossessed by the government. The killer broke into the house through the back door. The house did not have phone service, and it's not exactly clear where the killer called from. but it is suspected that they called the pizza delivery order in at a payphone near the house. Morris had been shot 8 times, once in the face, 6 times in the torso, and once in the right wrist. The murder weapon was a .22 caliber gun. The police received a lot of tips, but nothing panned out, and the case went cold. 3 years later, in May 1988, the police thought they caught a break. A man was arrested in a town about 180 miles from Great Falls. He was driving a car that had been stolen in Oregon. The police searched the car and they found a pawn shop receipt for a .22 caliber gun that had been pawned. It turned out that the car thief had stolen the gun from his friend's home 3 days earlier. His friend had reported the gun stolen. Ballistic testing was done on the gun, and it was believed that the gun was the one used to kill Morris Davis. The man who owned the gun was only identified by the name Rick. The police interviewed Rick and determined he did not kill Morris. The problem was that Rick claimed that the gun had been in his possession until his friend stole it 3 days before he was arrested. The police could not figure out why someone would steal Rick's gun, drive over 700 miles across multiple states to murder a pizza delivery man and steal $300, and then drive all the way back to Oregon and then put the gun back in Rick's home in the exact same place where they stole it from. They also managed to do this without Rick or his wife noticing. 5.5 years later, more ballistic testing was performed on the gun. It was determined it was not the gun used to murder Morris Davis. So the investigation was back at square one. Morris Davis's family has been vocally critical of the police's investigation into the murder. Cliff Davis decided to get in contact with someone he considered a likely suspect. His name was Donnie Dubray. When Cliff got in contact with Dubray, he was serving a life sentence for a brutal murder that happened in 1986. In October 1986, Suzette Pritchard was 18 years old. She was a triplet sister in a religious family. At the time, Pritchard was enrolled in college. She was studying Christian education and she hoped to become a religion teacher. Suzette Pritchard was described as bright, vibrant, wholesome, and innocent. She got a job as a clerk at the Town Pump convenience store in Great Falls. Her first solo shift was on the evening of October 6, 1986. The person who was supposed to take over for Pritchard was sick, so Pritchard was covering their shift. At 12:55 a.m., 2 of Pritchard's friends and her sister stopped by the store to bring her some French fries from a nearby fast food restaurant. When they got there, they noticed an old beat-up maroon car parked outside the store. One of the friends went inside the store and noticed that there was a man in the store. She thought that the man may have been drunk. She tried to have a conversation with him, but he didn't respond to her. When she was in the store, the man was trying to operate the store's microwave. The friend left the store and joined her friend and Pritchard's sister in the car. They drove out of the parking lot, and one of them happened to notice it was 1:08 a.m. A man drove by the convenience store around 1:20 a.m. and he saw a reddish beat-up car with damage on the rear leaving the parking lot. Less than 2 minutes later, one of Pritchard's friends walked back into the store. Pritchard had less than 40 minutes left in her first solo shift. The friend found Pritchard's dead body on the floor behind the counter. She had been stabbed 28 times. The friend called 911 and an officer was at the store within minutes. On the counter was a ham and cheese sandwich that was still warm. The last purchase rung up on the register was 99 cents, which was the price of the sandwich. The patron apparently paid $1 because the change was a penny. There was about $300 missing from the register. A massive investigation was launched, and the police had several suspects. One of them was a 23-year-old man named Wally Lee Clark. Even though Clark was the same age as Donnie Dubray, he was Dubray's mother's common-law husband. But the police did not find any evidence that Clark was involved in the murder of Suzette Pritchard. 2 months after Pritchard's murder, a woman went to the police and told them that Donnie Dubray had confessed to killing Pritchard. But the police did not investigate the tip because they had a lot of other leads to follow. 2.5 years later, another woman went to the police and said that Dubray may have killed Pritchard. Once again, the police did not follow up on the lead. About 4 months after the murder of Suzette Pritchard, in February 1987, Wally Clark was arrested and charged with murder. It was for a murder that was committed nearly 2 years before Suzette Pritchard was killed. In the early hours of April 23, 1985, firefighters were called to Lewis Murphy's home in Browning, Montana, because it was on fire. Inside the home, they found the dead body of 52-year-old Lewis Murphy. It was apparent that Murphy's death was a homicide. He had been tied up and left inside the burning house. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. The medical examiner also said it was clear that the 52-year-old man had been sexually assaulted. Wally Clark was arrested 2 years after the murder because a man named Harold Mad Plume talked to the pastor of his church. Mad Plume and the pastor got in contact with the FBI, who were investigating Lewis Murphy's murder because the murder happened on an Aboriginal reserve. Mad Plume said he was with Wally Clark on the night of Murphy's murder. Mad Plume initially told the investigators that he was riding around town with Clark and Clark's stepson, Donnie Dubray. Mad Plume said he dropped off Clark and Dubray near Murphy's home. But when Wally Clark went to trial for Lewis Murphy's murder in October 1987, Mad Plume had a different story. He testified that he went to Lewis Murphy's home with Clark, and he did not mention Dubray being there. Mad Plume claimed he watched as Clark sexually assaulted Murphy, and then he saw Clark start the deadly blaze. Mad Plume said he did not go to the authorities earlier because Clark had threatened to kill him and his family. Wally Clark was found guilty of second-degree murder, arson, and sodomy. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years in a federal prison. Donnie Dubray denied having anything to do with the murder of Lewis Murphy. He claimed at the time of the murder he was in a wheelchair. He also said that if the FBI had any evidence connecting him to Murphy's murder, he would have been charged with the murder as well. In the 3 years after his stepfather's trial, Donnie Dubray was arrested several times. This included being arrested for rape and attempted rape. However, he ended up beating those charges. But he did spend time in prison for crimes like burglary and breaking and entering. On July 26, 1990, Dubray was arrested for rape, and this time he was convicted. He was sentenced to 27 years in prison. In the spring of 1997, a man got in contact with the police and told them that Donnie Dubray killed Suzette Pritchard. The informant said that at the time of Pritchard's murder, Dubray drove an old beat-up red or maroon Pontiac that had damage on the rear. The detective decided to investigate Dubray, and he learned that at the time of Pritchard's murder, Dubray did in fact drive a 1969 Pontiac that was red or maroon. The detective interviewed the woman Dewayne was dating at the time of the murder. She said that he went out on the night of the murder and he did not return until the next morning. She said that later that day she traveled to Seattle, where she stayed for several months. A month or two after Pritchard's murder, Dewayne showed up in Seattle. He confessed to her that he robbed the convenience store where Pritchard worked. The detective then had Pritchard's friend who found her body look at a photo lineup which included a photo of Dewayne. About 10 minutes before Pritchard's friend found her body, she had been in the store and she saw a man who looked intoxicated and he was trying to use the microwave. When she saw the photo lineup, she identified Dewayne as the man she saw in the store. In March 1998, Dewayne was charged with Pritchard's murder. Donnie Dewayne went to trial for the murder of Suzette Pritchard over 12 years after she was killed in January 1999. His trial lasted several weeks. The jury deliberated for 27 hours. They found him guilty of deliberate homicide. He was sentenced to life in prison. Morris Davis's brother, Cliff, saw several similarities between his brother's murder and Suzette Pritchard's murder. They happened about 2.5 miles from each other. They were both killed in robberies, and each murder was overkill. Morris was shot 8 times, and Pritchard was stabbed 28 times. So Cliff got in contact with Donnie Dewayne in prison. Cliff said that Dewayne knew things that only someone who was at the crime scene would have known. This included the layout of the house and what angles the gun was fired at. However, Cliff said that Dewayne denied being the shooter. Cliff said that Dewayne admitted to being in the house when the murder happened, but he said he wasn't the killer. There has been speculation that if Dewayne didn't act alone, he may have committed the murder with his stepfather, Wally Clark. Morris Davis was killed on April 5, 1985, just a few weeks before Louis Murphy's murder. The police have said that Donnie Dewayne is a suspect in the murder of Morris Davis. However, they did not have enough evidence to charge Dewayne with Morris's murder. Donnie Dewayne died in prison in May 2016 at the age of 55. The police have not said if Wally Clark is considered a suspect in the murder of Morris Davis. Clark is serving a sentence for the murder of Louis Murphy at the Federal Correctional Institution Hurlong in Hurlong, California. If you're looking for something new to watch, why not check out my new channel, Chapter Dark, which I started with the creator of Top 5 Unknowns. Every week we have a new mystery for you to solve. If you like escape rooms, puzzles, or riddles, then you'll hopefully like Chapter Dark. In our latest video, an attorney has been murdered after getting a big promotion. His killer is later found dead, apparently by his own hand. Was the attorney's murder a random act of violence or a professional hit? This is just one of the mysteries available for you to solve on Chapter Dark. Do you have the detective skills to solve them all? You can find a link to Chapter Dark in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We hope you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.